Here we go!
You're listening to Theological Discussions with Christian Anarchists.
Well, I've got nothing better to do.
He did not just say that.
One man, one mic, plenty of scripture, and absolutely no filter for truth.
He's a 5-point Calvinist who affirms theistic evolution. He reeks of being hellbound.
This guy shares more videos of James White than James White.
He's just another stupid Bible-thumping Matt Slick wannabe.
The views expressed on this show are solely those of the host and do not in its entirety express the views of the volunteering members of Spiritually Honest Ministries. Enjoy the podcast or get ready to send your hate comments.
Beginning broadcast in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to another episode of Theological Discussion, and I am your host, the Christian Anarchist, and you're tuning in to Theological Discussion. So, that being said, let's get ready and get started. I just want to thank you all for tuning in, making this something you want to watch or listen to for the day. And don't forget to check out, the YouTube channel, whatnot. Anyways, hope y'all are all doing pretty well, and I hope I don't bore you much, but we got a couple of interesting topics to cover over today. And that is, we're going to go over a couple of YouTubers that have come out recently on different issues, and we're going to look at some of the stuff. One of them is the atheist who goes by the name of the Messianic Manic. I got to take a look at the thing to make sure I get it right. Messianic Manic. Okay, Messianic Manic. And this is a video I gotta check out later on. Apparently just came out yesterday, and it's called wants you to keep off the grass. Oh yeah, the grass is in the marijuana. I mean, don't see why that would be a problem. Right. Anyways, that being said, so let's go on to the Messianic Manic. And take a look at what's going on. Because recently, a guy that I have worked for doing voices for, tektontv, he had been dealing with the Messianic Manic with a video in which he responded to specifically certain things about the Jewish law codes and such. And he went on showing about how at least Tekton did, that the text was written for a specific audience, at least during the time in which it was written, because it was written in Hebrew. It wasn't written in some universal language, in a way that English today can be sort of considered a universal language towards certain people, because you have some in the other countries that are able to speak in English, whether it be within Germany, Japanese, I don't know about Japanese, maybe China, I'm not sure, I have to double check on that one specifically, but you have people that are a bit bilingual, and one of the popular ones would be the English language, within that respect, but no, they used Hebrew to relay this, and I can understand the Messianic Manic skepticism towards using things like that, where God's using the Hebrew language and such, but the objection doesn't seem to just simply stop there. Instead, the objection simply is, no, this is from because he doesn't show his face or show anything like that, so he uses slides, so I can just read the slides for you. And he simply says, in terms of like I think it was slavery or thing on how to treat women. I forget exactly what the topic went about, but he's basically said, why wouldn't? Oh shit. Okay. All right. So he says, why wouldn't a perfect document created by a perfect, all-powerful, all-loving God be perfectly clear to everyone, rather than just to the people with knowledge of ancient Hebrew law codes. So, why wouldn't a perfect document created by a perfect, all-powerful, all-loving God be perfectly clear to everyone? Okay. First of all, we need to understand what you mean by perfect document, because there are some Christians out there, and though they are wrong for this, they would say that, the text has been preserved without changes, even though that we have a preservation of the text, but the text has gone through changes, textual variants. It has gone through textual corruptions through times, at least corruptions that would be identified in the same category as people like Bart Ehrman, Bruce Metzger, and all these others have stated. And the corruptions are just simply textual variants that have come about through copyist mistakes, scribal errors, but there's still a preservation in the fact of the vast majority of manuscripts that we managed to have, and we're able to figure out what was the original text. So, that being said, why wouldn't a perfect document created by a perfect, all-powerful, all-loving God be perfectly clear to everyone? Well, again, the manuscripts in which they're written in are written in a language not everyone can understand. Hebrew was written, and especially the issue y'all are debating about in this goes back to Hebrew law codes. Hebrew is a language that only the Jews would be familiar with. It would not be something that would be necessarily up to par with our customs or the other some of the other surrounding customs at the time of the pagans. So our standards and understandings of it's going to definitely be different if we don't understand ancient Hebraic law codes. And so this is the one thing I wanted to actually discuss, is this particular issue that is going on with the Messianic Manic and his objections, as you'll see. So as we'll see, we're going to take a look at the other parts. Okay, also, just a thing, and Tekton kind of responded to this by saying, he doesn't want people that are lazy to be working in the kingdom. And he basically points out to Matthew 25 verses 14 through 30, which is the parable of the 10 minas, I think is what it is. I forgot what, because I know there's two different accounts and they use the different terminology or the different names. And then of course so let me just point out all the different objections he has. This Manic. And that is, did Yahweh intend the Bible as a message for everyone, or only for people who knew enough about the legal system of ancient Judea to be able to interpret it the way the people of that time did? So I want to get to that one, but then he says, should everyone without credentials always refrain from expressing skepticism towards those who have them? This looks like one big argument from authority here, and of course it's not an argument from authority. But at the same time, also think about it, the fact that, should everyone without medical degrees, should they refrain from practicing medicine? Again, another thing that Tekton had brought up, and it's a legitimate argument, that you have people that are like anti-vaxxers out there. And they will say, well, should everyone without these credentials on medicine refrain from expressing skepticism towards those who have them? This looks like a big argument from authority here in terms of the medical thing. We just have to take what they say about vaccines. But it's not necessarily that. I mean, the issue is also the fact that you can look into the information that's out there that is provided by the information out there from the professionals, from the people that have practiced and have examined and these things from a scholarly PhD perspective. Okay, and then he says, simply saying we studied it is not an answer. My question was intended to discover how the researchers came to their conclusions, specifically. Show me the data, and how the scholars' conclusions follow from the data. Simply saying go look it up is a common evasion tactic used by trolls. Okay. That's a tactic invasion used by trolls when saying that we studied it is... Okay, to be fair, that's a good point. But the issue is that if you're saying, quote, my question was intended to discover how the researchers came to their conclusions specifically. How else are you going to figure out how they came to their conclusions? So you can look this stuff up yourself as well. I mean, if you're really that much looking for it in questions, you don't just stop at one person on YouTube and all that. If not, why not just send him an email or anything like that, or look up the videos in which he has gone over some of these issues? Because I've seen Tekton TV's material, and he will quote source after source of the different scholarly material, in which not just simply saying, well, this guy came to it like this way, but also showing the quotations and the citations, such as showing how Adolf Hitler was not an atheist, but a branch of was a founder of his own branch of a sect of Christianity, which is a cultic mindset that is called positive Christianity, which was basically Aryan, Judaic, or anti-Jewish Christianity. So it says, show me the data and how the scholar's conclusions follow from the data. Again, if you want the data and all that kind of stuff, because remember, some of the stuff is copyright protected, so it won't be able to be cited even under the fair use issue. Because I've seen some will say you can use a certain limitation of words per thing you use on it, but then some say any citation you must contact us before you decide to distribute the information. So it's not that easy, because especially with some of the stuff that Tekton has access to is stuff that I'd have to pay money monthly for in articles, and not just simply a book that you can buy. So again, this is just one of those things where, unfortunately for you, you're gonna have to go look it up, because sometimes he's not able to with some of the stuff, because he has a very vast majority collection of stuff that I guarantee is definitely from the big scholarly perspective. So it says, so the parts of the Bible in question weren't written to everyone. If that's the case, what was the point of including it in the canon? Lots of fundies have interpreted the Old Testament laws literally and have done a lot of harm as a result. And there have been people that have observed the issue about the issue of survival of the fittest in a way that posts it into social Darwinism, which is a thing that I've learned about a bit during my time at college, when learning about sociology, and that social Darwinism was a thing that took place with people taking the idea from Darwinistic evolution and using it into a philosophy of social theory. And I mean, just because some people are going to interpret it literally, I mean, again, we're not saying that things aren't literal, but people trying to apply them to themselves, I agree, a lot of harm has been done, and that's because they don't understand Old Testament laws. Because as it says, so the parts of the Bible in question weren't written to everyone. If that's the case, what was the point of including in the canon? The point of including into the canon is because of the tradition of the history of that these books were inspired by God. They are God-breathed, but they have a specific context, and that is that these were written for Moses and his people under the Mosaic covenant. In fact, as you can see in most of these laws, like Leviticus 1, Leviticus 5, Leviticus 6, and the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, and then goes on in process, especially in Leviticus 1, we see it says, speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, if any man bring unto you a burnt offering unto the Lord, ye shall bring your offering to the cattle and such. So we see that these texts are specifically aimed at an audience, and he names them, and that is to Moses and to specific Israelites. Now, again, this is what really needs to be understood about the text, is that you have to read the entirety of the context in order to understand what's being addressed. Because I know that this is one of the things that not just atheists, but Seventh-day Adventists, Hebrew Israelites, and a few other groups that cling to Old Testament, these people are going very hardcore towards the issue about that, well, Old Testament laws still need to be enacted because they're still part of the canon and all that. So if you wanted something, here's something I'll give to you. So there's a masterful essay that was written down from David A. Dorsey called The Law of Moses and the Christian, a Compromise. He basically demonstrates that the Mosaic Law is simply not applicable to people who aren't ancient Israelites. So I'm just saying that. But what about an actual quote? Let me bring it up. He notes that many of the laws that is mentioned in the Torah regulate the lives of people in the distinctive geographical and climatic conditions found in the southern Levant, and many of the regulations are inapplicable, unintelligible, or even nonsensical outside the regime. And what is the source for this part? It's page 325 in the particular essay. I'm trying to remember what because it says it's from a journal essay, and it's from this, so I'll get the link out for you, or at least, not the link, but at least a place to get it. Christian essay. Okay. It says GETS. Okay. If this is what I'm thinking about, GET, but what does it even stand for? That's the one thing I want to figure out later on. Alright. Anyways. No, that's probably not it. Oh well. I'll have to find it later on. We'll see what happens. But yeah, that's where page 325 in this particular essay is where we see this happen. Now, he mentions also laws such as the ones in Exodus 29 verse 22. Regulate the offering of the fat tail and the fat tail of the ram, which this only exists in a limited geographical location. The law in Exodus 23:11 regulating cultivation of the olive tree, which again is also rare geographically. He then notes many laws were, quote, designed by God to regulate the lives of a people whose cultural milieu was that of the ancient Near East. This is 2 more pages after that one, so 327. Okay, so laws like Deuteronomy 17 verses 14 through 20's regulations on the style of heredity kingship practiced in the ancient Near East, as well as Deuteronomy 19 through 20 regulations on ancient Near Eastern siege practices. So that's something from David A. Dorsey on why it's specifically written for a ancient Israelite audience in regards to how the law is to be applied to them. So there's actually an interesting, this will be something I will link, and that is Are Christians Under the Law of Moses by Keith Thompson of Reformed Apologetics Ministries. And while I don't agree with them on everything, such as I wasn't really impressed with the movie Darwin's Downfall, which he was against what was it? Evolution and even theistic evolution. I had a disagreement on that because I myself am a theistic evolutionist as a result. This article is pretty sound because of the fact that it's the sources and citations he brings. He quotes, according to his account on the endnotes, 16 different citations. And they all go into extensive detail on the matters that has to be discussed when examining the issue with the Christians, especially modern day American Christians, and rather if we are under the law of Moses. Now, I want to go back to one of the things because I said I would go back to it after trying to examine them all, but I guess I've been breaking that. Okay, sorry about that. Did Yahweh intend the Bible as a message for everyone, or only for people who knew enough about the legal system of ancient Judea to be able to interpret it the way people that time did? He intended the Bible to be a message for everyone, but he also intended everyone to be smart. He also intended everyone to have knowledge for people. But however, things that it's meant as an intended message for people to read. But as far as certain applications, these things did have an audience in mind. So when originally written, sorry folks, when these things were written, they did have an audience in mind. And they were two different audiences. One for us in order to understand the history of where our faith comes from as Christians. And then, of course, for the fact that the Old Testament is a history that shows under the Mosaic covenant, which the article does go about on this issue about the fact that this is all goes down to a Mosaic covenant, that these laws were applicable for these specific people for this specific time. And that's what we have to realize, is that covenant theology works like that. And if we're going to take the Bible literally, we must take the Bible with the issue of covenants, and therefore establishes our case that these things don't apply to us, but rather to Moses and his people. And we must understand how they thought in the ways of the culture and the language that they grew up in. So that being said, let's see what else he has said. Okay, anything else? Alright, let's take a look at the other set of quotes that I'd seen from, what's his name? Messianic. Okay, again, things like, and if you can't hear that's rain, that's picking up on the mic. Why would an all-powerful, all-loving God allow negative consequences that... Okay. This I just don't understand from him. Why would an all-powerful, all-loving God? It's like you know what an all-powerful, all-loving God would do. You'd assume we would know sometimes what the all-powerful, all-loving God would do. Okay, let me just suggest this. Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong unto the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong unto us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. So there are some things that only God knows, but those things that are revealed belong unto us. So there are certain things that we know, but there are also things that only God knows. We don't have that knowledge too. So for some things, such as why would he allow negative consequences that somebody needed to pay for to occur in the first place? And I don't make this point so I can whip it out of my pants in my own leisure, because making reproduction possible without lust would seem like a perfectly reasonable option to me as well. So, I mean, again, we may not know the answer to the question, but I don't think we should, say or bring up an objection either, because as Romans chapter 9, verse, trying to think of the passage at the moment, because I remember I preached a sermon on this one before. Romans chapter 9, verses 19, starting at verse 19. Thou wilt say then unto me, why doth he yet find fault? For who has resisted his will? Nay, but, O man, who are thou replies against God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why hast thou made me thus? Hath not the potter power over the clay of the same lump to make one vessel unto honor and another one unto dishonor? So God is the creator, and we are simply the creation. And when we bring up these kinds of objections, I mean, again, we're simply creation, and we don't have a right to ask these things of God, but we can know of them if they are. I don't know why every single time I've done these that I'm starting to get tired. Probably because I haven't had a soda in like months. So I need to start giving myself some. But yeah, I mean, if it's in the Bible, it'll help you with the answer there. If it's not, then it's something for a time in which hopefully God reveals that information to you. Now, that being said, I mean, personally, I don't see what's going on with most of the stuff that he brings up, because he basically says that, why would an all-powerful, all-loving God do this? Why would an all-powerful, all-loving God do that? As if you have an issue of, or have an understanding of what an all-loving, all-powerful God would do. Because people have a different definition of what this kind of God would do. We need an objective standard, not a subjective. So that's why I find that he needs to just look into these things, because it's not hard to do so, honestly. I mean, there's PDFs out there, and in fact, there's even different books out there or websites like biblicalstudies.org.uk that has access to free stuff, and you can just Google search on the website that gives you access to all the free material and all the free articles that have been done on the issue. Even from people like F.F. Bruce, who was a very good New Testament fellow. Anyways, that being said, so I'll just go over one more slide before we move on to a Muslim that had made an interesting post that I saw. So he basically, after all the things, says, so your answer is yes, I should uncritically accept what the scholars you cite are saying. You think that I'm, quote, too stupid to critically engage with them and have no, quote, no right to complain about your recommendation, that I just take them at their word. Alright, so let me see what Tekton actually said. It says, and of course, saying simply no, which is what I would say as well. My answer is that you should keep your trap shut until you become a reasonably informed adult and aren't stupid anymore. Now, I will say this. I'm not too fond of how Tekton responded in his behavior in this, and I think he should humble himself on this. But he basically says you can take or ignore their word for yourself, but stop running your yap publicly. Okay, here's what I would say to the question. Should I critically accept what the scholars you cite are saying? You think what I'm saying is stupid, or critically engage with them and have no right to complain about your recommendation, that I should just take them at their word? I'm not, and here's what I'll say. I won't say just take them at their word. In fact, I say that's why I encourage you to go buy and read the book. Go find these essays. Go find the Law of Moses and the Christian Compromise. Go look at Thomas Schreiner's material, in which the book is 40 Questions About Christians and Biblical Law. Go check out let me see, because I thought I saw D.A. Carson on this list. Yeah, D.A. Carson, Mystery and Fulfillment, Toward a More Comprehensive Paradigm of Paul's Understanding of the Old and New. I mean, there's all kinds of different books out there that you can get. S.M. Bao, Galatians 3:20 and the Covenant of Redemption. Bible dictionaries, commentaries. Those are some general things, and those are some decent cheap ones too. And you can find them out. And make sure you get them from the stuff that's like the big scholarly ones. So maybe for commentary on the law, there's individual commentary sets. So want to learn about something that's going on in Exodus for context, buy a book that explicitly is like 200 or 300 pages long, or maybe even 400 or 500, depending on which one you find, that deals only with Leviticus. And you can find all kinds of stuff that gets into the context and details and the scholarly arguments, and it's all there. In fact, sometimes you don't even just have to buy it. What I've usually have done, just gone to Lifeway and look in the commentary section, and I'll just sit down and read and take a look at it, maybe get some pictures. That's what I did in preparing the material I had for the video I made on Mark 10:18 with addressing Marshall Mathers. I mean, so it's not really hard, people. No. So that's what I would say. Just do some examination. And of course he says, I would encourage truthers who sincerely want to learn something to critically engage with engineers. Truthers critically engaging with engineers is only a problem if those truthers already have their minds made up and just want to give the appearance of having a debate in good faith. Again, yes, critically engage with these people, but also if you just simply say, why would an all-powerful, all-loving God do this? That's not an argument. That's just simply a question that pleads in the same way that, well, why would a government do this? Why would all this? I mean, people have different objections, and there's different ways things can get done, and societies just have different outlooks onto it. So we're obviously going to have a different perspective on what we define as what is all loving, all powerful, all good, and all that kind of stuff. Such as some people say it's all loving if God allows everyone to go to heaven, or someone will say it's all loving if God allows good people to go to heaven, but people like Osama and Hitler, they just need to stay. There should be no chance of redemption for them. That's a good thing if there's no redemption for them. So people have different perspectives on what they mean by all loving and all good. So again, I'd say encourage you to read and examine what's ahead. So we'll see where that goes. Alright, so I'm gonna be back. I'm gonna go get some water and try to hopefully wake up a little bit. But when I get back, we shall continue on with a video from a Muslim and his objection. So I'll see you when I return.
To have your own short segment on theological discussion, be sure to email him at askchristiananarchist@gmx.com for more info.
Alright, and we're back. Alright, that being said, let us head on over to the Muslim video, because I don't have much time left on this one. So I gotta get to work in about a few by the time I've been making this whole video shindig, whatnot. Alright, so recently I had found I had a community on what was it, Google Plus, that was a Christian versus Muslim community, and I found that some guy had joined and he was trying to promote his channel, which that seems to all be what he does on Google Plus these days. And and I took a look at some of the content, which he apparently takes amounts of time to do. He took a 3 months ago he made a video, and then it's like takes him 3 months to make another one on moral and intellectual accusations cannot disprove the prophethood. Okay, so I think he is, in my opinion so far, this guy who calls himself Muslim Al-Fatih, Al-Fadi, or however you pronounce it. I'm not too sure. I'm not an Arabic speaker or have studied Arabic. But the way I've seen it, there's only a few videos out. So let me take a look at the content. He's only have 5 videos. One is the 50 reasons why filtered, which shows David Wood's little filtered things or whatnot. And I don't know what, I haven't seen this video yet. So David's, okay, so right here he has like so at least so far from what I'm looking at, because I haven't looked at the whole thing yet, but he said, but apparently where he takes David's arguments as to why Muhammad is not a prophet or why the Quran's not true, and uses biblical, scientific, irrelevant, and Quranic arguments that are under the classifications. So I guess from what I'm looking at so far, it just seems to be that he labels some of the stuff. And he leaves it pretty much up to people to judge the honesty. So we'll see how that turns out. But going into the actual video we're discussing, is why moral and intellectual accusations cannot disprove prophethood. And I think he brings up a fair point, because I know many people have tried to use the argument saying, well, Muhammad ordered the slaughter of people. So because he ordered the slaughter of people, he's not a prophet of God, because he ordered mass millions to be slaughtered. And as he said, basically says, he says, and I wish he would use a mic or something, even if it's just this iPhone that I have in my hand or something like that, because that's what I started out with when I started off on YouTube, getting away from the text videos, is using my microphone from my iPhone and then using a software on the computer after sending the audio file to my computer to edit it onto there. And the truth is, and this is what from this video, quote, prophet's job is to give you success in the sight of God, not the sight of people. So he uses the standard of we have to go to God as our authority, not the authority of our own personal intellectual reasoning. And then he says, you need to realize that ethical values are relative from place to place and time to time. Okay. To me, that almost sounds like subjective standards, because it's saying that the morals change from time to time when, or that the ethical values are relative from place to place and time to time, when I'd say ethical values are relevant according to God. And of course under covenants. So he said, so one of the questions he goes back to is one from David Wood, in which the question is, the killing of apostates. That's the issue, is that's a reason to discount the prophethood of Muhammad, is that because he ordered people to kill apostates. And a lot of Christians mention that up, but also noting that in Deuteronomy 17 verses 2 through 6, again, this is the Torah that Moses was ordered to tell people, the Israelites, that they had to kill apostates. That was it. The death penalty was the execution for apostates, and that's not the only verse that does it, actually. In fact, if I can get to the passage, Deuteronomy 13 verses 6 through 9 is actually the first instance in which we see the issue. It says, if thy brother, the son of thy mother, and it goes on with the other people saying, that they entice thee secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which thou hast not known, namely of the gods of the people which are round about you, nigh unto thee, or far off from thee, from the one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth. Thou shalt not consent to them, nor hearken unto them, neither shall thine eye pity them, neither shalt thou spare them, neither shalt thou conceal them. But he answered and said, why do you okay, no, that's another part. Okay, but yeah, it says, thou shalt surely kill them, thine hand shall be the first upon him to put him to death, afterwards the hands of all the people. So basically, if you see someone trying to say, let's go serve other gods, you know this person's an apostate and is telling you to do this, kill him. That we don't disagree as Christians. I don't think a Christian should disagree that the Torah, that was founded in Deuteronomy. There was such things as the death of apostates. That's of course under a specific covenant, and as we've heard discussed earlier in the show, that covenant stays for that particular message, for that specific audience. We are Christians and under a new covenant, and that's where he tries to draw the line too, is that Jesus and Paul, so I don't know where, I guess he's not an anti-Pauline Muslim, so we'll see. He says in Matthew 15, Jesus scolds the Pharisees and says this in verses 3 through 4, and that is, but he answered and said unto them, why do you transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? For God commanded, saying, honor thy father and mother, and he that curseth father or mother, let him die the death. So let's go over to the passage to examine that. So Matthew chapter 15, starting in verse 1, we see that the scribes come to, and the Pharisees come to Jesus, and they say, why do the disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. But then Jesus answers with a question of rhetorical, because he says, no, they say, why did the disciples transgress the traditions of the elders? No, not the tradition of the Torah, not the commandments of God, but the traditions of elders. And that is these traditions that we find in elders, as John Gill notes the huge list in his commentary, that different rabbinical writings mention this, such as, I don't know where it says where this one's from, but it says, quote, Hillel and Shammai decreed concerning the purification of the hands, Rabbi Joseph ben Arban, in the name of Rabbi Levi, says, so was the tradition before, but they forgot it. And these two stood up and agreed with the minds of the former ones. However, it is a certain point that the washing of the hands and the dipping of them are from the words of the scribes. And then he says, the breach of this rule was reckoned equal to the most flagitious crimes, as Rabbi Jose says, whoever eats bread without washing of hands is as if he lays with a whore. And says Rabbi Eliezer, whoever despises washing of hands shall be rooted out of the world. So he was making this specific point in response to what the traditions of the rabbinical writings had said. And Jesus would have been aware of it. Because also note, it says elsewhere, in right here it says K. And I'm going to take a look at what K says in the collection here by Gill. G-H... it's hard to find this. Okay. Zohar in Deuteronomy folio 107.3, where this guy, I think it's Rabbi Zohar or something like that, says that he that blesseth food with defiled hands is guilty of death. So he's dealing with the context that the traditions they're saying, they're trying to get the disciples killed, apparently, I guess. Or make some accusation, because he says they wash not their hands when they eat bread, and obviously as a Jew they're going to bless the food when they eat. And if they were caught doing such a thing, they would be worthy of death, according to rabbinical tradition. And then Jesus responds saying, why do you also transgress the commandments of God by your tradition? For God commanded, saying, honor thy father and mother, and he that curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, whosoever shall say to his mother or father, it is a gift. But whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, and honor not his mother or father, he shall be free. Thus have ye made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition. Ye hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, the people draw nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines of the commandments of men. So Jesus is simply saying that they are hypocrites by their standards. Now Jesus is going to observe and keep these commandments of what's being mentioned here, but he's not commanding and telling other Jews and Pharisees to do this, because he recognizes that, one, he's come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, as he has stated in his Gospels. And then whenever we see the rest of the epistles of the apostles and in their Gospels, they are given the commandments of Jesus, and that they are no longer under a covenant of the Mosaic law, but they are under a covenant of Christ that is founded within the blood of Jesus. That was mentioned, that it was the sign and the seal was the blood of Jesus at the Last Supper. So it's not this issue of, well, it says in this particular verse, which the verse itself, I believe, is Exodus chapter... part of it's chapter 20, verse 12. Let me see here. Yeah, it's Exodus 21:17, actually, where that's the verse that Jesus is citing from, for it says, God commanded, saying, honor the mother and father, he that curseth them, let him die. So again, and even then, that is not an apostate thing either. But yet, so yeah, kill disobedient children. That's something that he didn't command. He just told people that this was in the law, but yet you want to stick with rabbinical tradition of wanting to kill someone or something rather than what's in the Torah. It was a matter of trying to establish an authority, not given a command thing. Because note that Jesus, in the rest of the context of Matthew and the Gospels, and what his apostles learned from him, is that we are no longer under Torah as Christians, under the covenant of Christ. And then the next thing he suggests is, Paul suggests the death of sinners and apostates, which is that in Romans chapter 1, verses 20 through 32, most of you already are well familiar with what the passage says, which is that visible things from creation of the world, clearly seen, being understood by things. People have this knowledge of God based upon the creation that surrounds them. And then it talks about that these people started giving over to the flesh and the desires. They gave up God to follow the lusts of their own hearts and their own flesh. They changed the truth of God, turned it into a lie, and then worship creature rather than creator. So it says all these things, and then he goes over to particularly verse 32, which says, or starting at verse 31 actually, because it says, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable and unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Okay, so first of all, I don't understand this particular phraseology that is being used by the likes of people such as Muslim al-Fatih. And that is that, for one, the verse we're looking at here is a very simple passage, and that is knowing the judgment of God. So the judgment of God, not the judgment upon other people. And as John Gill actually notes in his commentary too, either this could refer to the law of God, the law and light of nature, by which they made in some measure know the difference between good and evil and what was right and wrong, or the judiciary sentence of God against sin. And he says that these such things are worthy of death. And while the Torah could say that some of these sins are worthy of and punishable by the means of death, the issue is not in order for us to carry out. That's not what he's saying, because it just simply says that the worthy of it is death. And we know just simply that it can be in reference that it's worthy of death in the fact that we do deserve the penalty of the death, and as well as that the death we also have already died in. For as it says, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And then and that's Romans 3:23, by the way. In Romans 6, in verse 23, the wages of sin. What are the wages? The wages, or the ospanion, the payment, the results, the wages of sin is death. When you have committed sin, the results that you have of it after committing sin, your reward is death for committing sin. But the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So Paul speaks about the issue of death and sin, and that the issues of this, it's all bounded down to specifically this one context of what sin is. And those who do these things, they should be put to death. No, because Paul says the other language about it's worthy of death and the wages are of death. But they didn't kill apostates. Matter of fact, I know they kind of did later on during the Roman Catholic and the Protestant era. But were there any death of apostates during the early years of Christianity? That would be what I would like to know. Because as far as I'm under the impression of, no church father writing seems to subscribe the issue of the death of people from departing from the Christian faith. All I've seen that is that they have committed apostasy, then they just are to turn from them. They are not to act as a Christian. And in fact, in one thing I'm looking at in the writing of First Clement, which is a 1st century document and was a person who traveled with Paul, so surely he would know what he's talking about. In this epistle of Clement says, everyone abandons the fear of God and is become blind in his faith. Neither walks in the ordinance of his appointment, nor acts as a part becoming a Christian, but walks after his own wicked lusts, resuming the practice of an unrighteous and ungodly envy, by which death itself entered into the world. So that's the one thing I'm seeing so far about the issue. But again, just simply says that everyone abandons the fear of God, become blind in his faith, and that those who walk after their own lust, they go back into this unrighteousness state, and in which the same way that death entered itself into the world through this. So I don't see anywhere where Clement has asked for the death of people. And he's about as early as we can get in concerning of a first century document besides Polycarp. So I don't see where it's saying that they must execute, because we see that so far from Polycarp, Clement of Rome, and a few others that no one understood Paul this way. And I highly doubt anyone would. So I just want to suggest this. If you're going to make an argument like that Paul has suggested the death of sinners and apostates, you're going to have to most prove it, because so far you haven't been able to prove it in the video. And that's why, for one, I don't know why you didn't just simply at least just quote that, because all you can just do is go to verse 29 and go all the way down to verse 32, or at least verse 28 to verse 32. And it's not that long to show, because you managed to show the verses in Deuteronomy just perfectly fine. Or you can at least read it yourself if you decide the next video will be the first time you use your actual voice, because again, that also making that kind of video is not hard. So I agree, we should not use emotional, moral, intellectual reasoning type of arguments, but rather argue specifically from the text. But at the same time, I want the Muslim to also be consistent in the fact that while I agree with that Moses was a prophet and he ordered the killing of apostates, Jesus telling people or reminding them to kill disobedient children is not what he had in mind. And Paul did not suggest the death of sinners and apostates. That is basically lying or being ignorant of this information without looking into it head on and using it to pass an agenda to people. And that's why I would suggest to people who are Muslims to likewise, if they're going to ask for the same consistency they demand of us for our text, or for when we examine their text, to be consistent towards the examination of our text. So, that being said, I want to just say one suggestion for my friend. And hopefully maybe Muslim Al-Fatiha can come on the show at some point, or who knows, maybe we'll keep on doing reviews or going back exchanging videos with each other on different topics. I would suggest checking out this one book from a guy by the name of who's a YouTuber by the name of W. Masih. I think that's how you pronounce that. And he has a book that has come out, and he's been distributing these books online and to people in the street. In fact, I've seen a thing where he's actually given a Muslim family, a couple of Muslim women, these particular books. And the book is a gift to Muslims. Who is the Creator? Is the name of the book. And he has I think it's on the back. He uses the Quranic title thing, and the surahs in the Arabic, and it says, or I think it's the names of God in the Arabic, and it says, Quran 1:6, guide us to the straight path. And I'm gonna leave the link in the description. Y'all can check it out, 'cause who knows, maybe y'all can print these out, or if you're interested in getting copies of these from W. Masih, you can check him out. But there's a PDF online here, and I'll link in the description, that basically his purpose is to show from the Quran and from the Bible that Jesus Christ is God, and that if you read the Quran and understand some of the stuff, then go to the Bible, you can see and understand that Jesus is indeed God, and that this guy apparently, I guess he was a former Muslim, and that it was the Quran that helped him get out of Islam. and he's hoping that this can save some Muslims, and who knows, maybe one day the other guy can do the same thing. So that being hopefully I'll have some hope for Muslim Al-Fatih. Anyways, that being said, that's all we're gonna have for the show. I thank y'all all for tuning in. Sorry this isn't as long as we've had some of the stuff been, but either way, we got some edification done. We got some stuff out there. I will try to make a edition going over my experience at the the AVC Anime Fest and Monroe. I will hopefully see y'all there, be handing out some tracks, and hopefully witnessing to some people there and having a good time to relax from work, because Lord knows I need it. Anyways, that being said, I will lead y'all in prayer, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this podcast. We thank you that you have allowed this podcast to go on as much as it has. I just want to ask that you bless the podcast, you bless the content that has been provided in order that people may benefit from it, that people may learn from it, that if there's anyone watching, whether they be Christian, atheist, or Muslim, or whoever, that they be affected and they may learn of your truth, Lord. Thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for our sins. For if it weren't for him, we would not be able to be redeemed and justified in your sight, Lord. It is in his name I pray. Amen. Alright, and I'll see you next time. Shalom Aleichem. Peace be upon you, because I wish that upon you. Have a good day.
If you would like to have your own short segment on theological discussion, be sure to email him at askchristiananarchist@gmx.com for more info.